Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Education Matters with Jim O'Connell. Welcome. I hope you're happily ensconced someplace and having your dinner or whatever it may be. Of course, that's if you're watching us live. And it's Tuesday, the 19th of June. And if you are watching live, it's 6 p.m. And the call-in number for anybody who has anything they'd like to share is 640-3091. That's 603-640-3091. And as usual, I'm happy to hear your opinions, whether they coincide with mine or not. You're always welcome to offer your thoughts on this program. So I'm going to start with where I often start with, which is just what's going on. We're at a funny position here right now because there's actually a school board meeting starting right as this program finishes on Tuesday night, which is the place where we will get the first indication of where the budget lies and where cuts are likely to fall. And sadly, once again, this year we'll be talking about cuts, and I just find that depressing. So I was disappointed that the Board of Mayor and Aldermen didn't see fit to give the superintendent, Dr. Vargas, the additional money that he asked for. Because once again, he did not... It's not as though we were looking for, or he was looking for funding for everything that we'd had last year and to maintain that which was there. But remember, last year he had made a commitment to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen that when they gave him an additional monies, additional over the monies originally offered by Mayor Gatsas at that time, that money would be spent in a certain way. And there'd been a narrative in Manchester for some years, which was, you know, if we give the school board money for, let's say, books, they'll go and spend it on something else. Or if we give them money to put technology into one of the schools, then they'll take the money, but they won't spend it there, they'll spend it someplace else. Now, Dr. Vargas, as the new guy in town last year, and now he's here 2 years, but as the new superintendent in town last year, went before both the school board and then went on to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and said, look, our schools need the following things, and we have to do this, and it's necessary and it must be done. And the money was found and allocated to Dr. Vargas, and he was a man of his word, and of course the school board also, who supported it. And the money was spent exactly where Dr. Vargas had said it was needed, in the way that it was needed, and on the things it was needed for. I was hoping that would sort of break one other blockade. Excuse me. One other blockade that we've had for years, which was you give money to the school board and we've no guarantee that they're going to use it for the things that we have agreed they should. Well, so we did that last year, and then this year. The difference in the number was about $700,000 less than what was asked for. So there were going to be cuts in the school district anyway, and now with this additional $700,000 not loss because it wasn't there to begin with, but non-allocation, it means that some of the steps that were going to happen for next year will not happen. So. It's a little greyed out. I'm just disappointed by that. I heard and I agreed with what Alderman Kavanagh said, which was that, you know, the conversation, so long as the conversation was about the tax cap and where we are with the tax cap, it meant that we had this artificial number that we were trying to meet, and we would continue to try and, you know, shoehorn our budget into that number. And it's having a problem across the district. We're not able, the city is not able to provide the citizens with the services that the citizens desire for the amount of money that is available in the budget today, and that's an ongoing problem. And at some point, a decision will need to be made as to whether 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 we should continue with the tax cap or not. I just find it. I've made the point, and I'll just make it briefly here: is that the tax cap sets a line in the sand in time, in terms of services, and says no services beyond this shall you have. And the difficulty with that is that society advances, the world changes, and I've made the albeit ridiculous comparison that if you were to have introduced the tax cap in, let's say, 1910, then you would retain the services you had in 1910, and you wouldn't have things like street lighting, and you wouldn't have traffic lights, etc., etc. Now, I know that may be ridiculous, but in the end, if you have the tax cap in place now for 10 years, and you say, well, we're going to keep it for 10 years more, at some point as a city, you have to decide whether you're going to join the 21st century or not. Having the least well-funded school system in the state of New Hampshire is nothing to be proud of. It's actually a source of shame. And having the largest class sizes with the least number of teachers per student of any town or district in the state of New Hampshire is also a shameful number. So I do appreciate that the Board of Mayor and Aldermen at least agreed to use the additional funds, the additional revenue, to spend and to put in most of it in a contingency fund, and what that alludes to is the idea that under the tax cap in Manchester, when I think it was last year or 2 years ago, for instance, car registrations, new car registrations, and many of those are fleets. There was an additional close to $2 million came in above budget. Now, it is patently ridiculous to have a city in need of services, and I concentrate on the school side. So let's, just having those numbers I just told you, with the least well-funded school system in the state and needs not being met, and yet to have an additional $2 million come into the city. And city government isn't allowed to use that money in order to make the lives of the citizens better or to supply services. It has to go back to the taxpayers. And of course, when you have a hard lid on ever raising any taxes, and then any new revenues that come in must go back to the taxpayers and not be used for services, this really is a law that pushes the year over year. As time goes by, it forces the city further and further and further behind, or forces the city into a position where it is decreasing services, decreasing services, and decreasing services. And frankly, I choose to live in a city, in an urban area, New Hampshire's largest, the beautiful city of Manchester. It is a place that past generations took great pride in. Built wonderful facilities. There are some magnificent buildings here from people with vision and forethought and pride in civic pride and pride in the future, who went out and put their hands in their own pockets or did sought public funding for major projects. We don't have a dirty, smelly canal stinking up the city. We have perhaps the finest water in New Hampshire, and a water system that has been well managed and with great stewardship. Now, in the water case, of course, we have a separate water board or water authority that isn't reliant upon local taxes and a group of 14 elected officials to decide, whether the water system should be improved this year or we can wait for 10 more years. And you have to believe that if our water system were to have been managed by a Board of Mayor and Aldermen, then every year that came along, there'd be a reason why we don't really need a new pumping station, where the cost of dividing the runoff from storms from the sewerage system is too great. We'd be trying to find private enterprise to come in and give us some solution that they could take some of their profits out of it. And the bottom line is we'd be on the front pages of the paper, or we'd be like we are with education, or we would be on statewide statistics for our water quality, and we'd be wondering why people aren't coming to Manchester because the water quality is bad. But in the end, we're fine with individual politicians putting up their greedy little paws and saying, I'm going to hold the line. I won't add a single cent onto your taxes because I'll make sure we'll manage without water. And of course, those who can. They'll be fine because they just go and they'll build their house in some other town, or move their house to some other town, or they'll use bottled water, or they'll bore private wells, and it'll be the rest of us, the average guy in the street, who carries the can. Now, of course, you understand that, as I said at the outset, our water system happens to be excellent. I don't see why our school system couldn't be excellent too. One of the things that did bug me a lot during the conversations at the last school board meeting was one of the school board members who made the comment about, as our school population continues to decline, and with growing competition, we're going to have to face various realities. And I found that, and this is not an attack on that school board member, because I understand exactly where they were coming from. But if you're not careful, that's the kind of thinking that can creep into your mindset, and or that's the kind of mindset you can have. And so, when did it become okay in the city of Manchester to let the words come out of your mouth that might have crept into your head, but they actually come out of your mouth as a public representative, that you are saying that we've got to prepare for the slow demise of our public school system in Manchester, that's where it's going. And I, as one of the 14 people sitting around the table at the school board meeting, am not going to take action to change it. I acquiesce to it and accept it. I find that appalling, because the people who are moving into this city, and the people which is a smaller number than the number of people who would like to move to the city but don't come because of education in particular, those people see a bright future for Manchester and for Greater Manchester and for Southern New Hampshire. They're not giving up in some, our best days are behind us kind of mode. And I've frankly, and I hear this from Democrats, Republicans, and all across the political spectrum. I heard an alderman a few weeks back declare his great surprise. He was in a sort of a laughing tone, commented to the other members of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen that there was a development going on in the north side of the city where there were, 12 or 15 houses being built, and they were on the market at $800,000 or $900,000 each, or $800,000 each. And he was like, "Can you believe it, in Manchester? I don't know how they're going to do that. I mean, 800,000 in Manchester, are you kidding me?" And this was nothing like, we're moving forward. We have a diverse population in this city. Our city is a sought-after place, although it used to be named the first, second, third, fourth, or fifth best place to live in the United States, and is not anymore because we've refused to fund our schools. But it still has all these wonderful attractions, and people do want to move here. How can a city be led by people who are amazed that a property in Manchester might actually be worth more than what their images of some 1950s real estate numbers? The fact is, generally speaking, that a property in Nashua, comparison square footage or side-by-side comparison, that a property in Nashua is worth 1.5 to 2 times what the same property is worth in the city of Manchester, and a property in Portsmouth is worth 3 times what a property in Manchester is worth. And that is shameful and inexcusable. But when we have public representatives, there are 28 of them, 14 aldermen and 14 school board members, and plus a mayor. when some of those, not all of them, but when some of those are so outdated in their thinking, so limited in their thinking, so small-minded in their thinking, so petty in their thinking, that they're accepting already that somehow this is going back to the sort of the old Milltown images of Manchester, and thankfully and hopefully we've seen a few new members join our boards in the last time out. Hopefully we'll find some more who have a much more ambitious view of Manchester and what it can be and what it should be, and who recognise the vibrancy of the city and the exciting things that are going on and the great things that are going on, which is not, of course, to... I had a discussion with another alderman one day a couple of weeks ago. I was talking with Alderman Tim Baines, and Tim had responded to me in an online in an online forum somewhere, because I talked somewhere about some of the great things that were happening downtown, etc. And somehow we got our wires crossed. And Alderman Tim Baines has been pushing to do something about the vagrancy and people hanging out and sleeping on the sidewalks downtown, etc. I think he became of the impression that I was somehow poo-pooing that or saying that wasn't a problem. No, that is a problem. And so he and I have cleared the air on that, because I fully support Alderman Baines and his efforts to improve the downtown immediately right around Elm Street. I spoke to a couple of police officers. One of the efforts that have come to fruition because of Alderman Baines' efforts is that every night now there is a two-person police patrol that patrols on Elm Street and the blocks around Elm Street walking every afternoon and evening, and actually it's a wonderful thing to see. And they stroll along Elm Street, and people say hi and they chat, and they're there as a visible sign of a secure area for people to sit out and eat at restaurants in, etc. And whether it's perception or reality, the perception certainly is that here's an orderly, clean, fun place to be. And I think with the addition of, you look at people like the people who are building the new hotel near Indian Head on Lake Ave, and then with the other hotel going in on the Bedford lot, these are wonderful additions to the city. So I don't want to go on about everything that's happening in the city, but there are good things happening in the city, and people are investing in this city. And yet, when it comes to the school system, we somehow can't get out of the mode of saying, we'll accept the fact that we spend less than everybody else. And I find across the board with most aldermen and most school board members, those who would even prefer to do little to do more, none of them are really ready to sort of, blow things up somewhat and say, like Alderman Kavanagh said, this is fine, but I'm paraphrasing him now, but he's sort of saying these baby steps, are fine. But in the end, what we're doing is we're debating about this artificial line that's been drawn in the sand that everybody knows is not enough, because every year in, year out, departmental heads are being asked to hold the line on funding. And it just can't be done. You can't do it with your home budget if you're sitting at home. It just doesn't work that way, that you can draw a line in the sand and say we're going to spend less on the house this year than we did last year. Things happen. Oil goes up or goes down. A car needs to be replaced. One of your bushes or trees dies. You need some landscaping. Your kids get hungry or you need more food. Whatever it might be, I don't know. But this idea that you can say we're going to make do with a 1.6% increase, and that's just the way it is. The world doesn't work like that. But we'll find out tonight more about where we're going to be. The other thing I'd like to do is to talk just briefly about we're into now the first week. This is our first week of summer vacation, and my first wish is that people be safe, and especially young kids who are new drivers or it's their first summer out driving. Every year we hear horror stories. Thankfully, not to my knowledge recently in Manchester, but definitely in Greater Manchester. So be careful out there. The other thing is the whole swimming thing, and there's nothing more tragic than going back to school in September and finding out that some young child or some teenager in some misadventure has been lost. And accidents do happen and tragedies do happen, but if people would just be aware of it and take some care, how wonderful it would be if everybody who left our schools, other than our graduates, of course, everybody who left our schools in June is back there sitting, smiling at a desk on the first week of September, ready to start another year. So. There are wonderful resources in the city for the summertime for people. The school district, in conjunction with the libraries and others, has got a bunch of programs that are available. And one of the things is the whole Dr. Vargas. His very first month on the job here, a year and a half or close to 2 years ago now. It'll be 2 years in October, I believe. Said that one of the single best things we can do for kids is encourage them to read, and so that's one idea, right? So encouraging kids to read. The other thing is the drop off that happens in education when kids leave school right now and then come back to school in September. It sometimes takes weeks and weeks and weeks, perhaps months even, but certainly weeks, to get the kids back to where they were today. So there's sort of a big loss. There's a better word for it than that, I can't think of, but the summer drop or the summer. And so if we could, if you as parents anything you can do to avoid that would be a wonderful thing. Now I am a great believer in having quality time and getting away from work, getting away from studying, relaxing, having fun. Please get outside. Easier said than done with kids. Oftentimes it's easy to just sort of leave them on the couch. So an effort has to be made. They have to make an effort, and their parents have to make an effort to see that doesn't happen. But so I'm a great believer in getting away from it for a little bit. But I'm also a great believer in not just letting go at all. So any kid at any age, it's the quality of the reading, the book they might read, whether it's a kindergartner with a 10-page picture book to a rising senior who might want to take on Tolstoy's War and Peace or something, or perhaps get a going into junior year, get a head start on the wonderful American Studies course from Miss MacDonald and Mr. Silvera at Central High School, who teach one of the books they teach during that junior year is Moby Dick. Quite the tome for those of you who have read it. So if you're an older student, it's a great opportunity, whether, sitting in the backyard or hanging with friends or sitting on the beach. And it doesn't have to be literature, right? One can read anything. Just reading generally is a good thing. But the idea of keeping one's toe in the water, so to speak, gives you a great start going into next year, because you've never fully stopped learning and sort of shut down those parts of your brain. And so when you can still have a lot of fun, you can have fun learning things and finding out more about that which you read, and by so doing find out more about yourself, and then come back to school, a fully prepared student. So I'm a great advocate of that. So there are a number of things being done with regard to books, because sadly not everybody has access to books in their home. It always surprises me when I go in some houses, and not that I'm not some. If I ever visit your house, if I'm lucky enough, if people are gracious enough to invite me, it's not as though I'm in there checking out your library, but it's obvious. You go in some houses and there's like the obligatory like 3 books next to the fireplace or something, and it's a guide to New York and the Bible and whatever, some other thing. and then there are houses you go in, and they're sort of it's a bookish house, and bookish houses are great. So they're reinstituting this year the Bookmobile, which is going to be going around Manchester, and there's a schedule which is on mansd.org, which you'll be able to see. So um, there are 2 sessions every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, starting July 9th through August 10th. And you don't have to remember this here. You'll be able to find this in the libraries. These schedules are in the libraries or on the Manchester School District website. But on the way it's planned right now, what will happen starting July 9th, the Bookmobile will go out into neighbourhoods. It's staffed by Manchester School District educators. Thank you to those folks who are giving of their time freely. Other volunteers and also people from the city libraries. So so it's Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. On Monday from 10:30 to noon, they'll be at Livingston Park, and then from 1:30 to 3 at Elmwood Gardens, and then on Wednesdays from 10:30 to noon, the Bookmobile will be at the YMCA on Stark Street. That'll be Stark Street. That's between the YMCA and City Hall. It'll be parked there. And from 1:30 to 3 p.m. they'll be at Stevens Park at the Manchester Cal Ripken Baseball on Tarrytown Road. And then on Fridays, again 10:30 to noon, they'll be at Beach Street School on Beach Street, and then from 1:30 to 3 p.m. they'll be at Kelly's Falls over on Kimball Street. So that's a wonderful thing to be able to use. And then let me see. There's also, if I could find it, booked for summer is driving kids to read. Summer City Library reading. So the City Library, of course, the libraries have got their reading program, which goes on, and you can see that on the Manchester School District website as well. And if I could find on the Parks and Rec, the Parks and Recreation website has got a list of activities going on just right around reading. There is a passport program, and passports, lots of kids got these, and there are prizes available for them if you picked up the passport. And they weren't all just reading. Some of them were visiting like the Manchester Historical Society, or visiting the Courier Art Gallery, or any one of those things. You get a stamp at any one you do, and if you complete the little passport book at the end of the summer, there are prizes going to be given to students across all ages. So there are lots of things to do. If you go to the Office of Youth Services website in the city, if you go to the Parks and Recreation website, you'll see the times there for all the Manchester pools, etc. The Manchester pools open next weekend. If I had it up here, but I lost it somewhere as I went through here. Oh no, I have it right here. So first of all, the splash pad. And if you haven't been to the splash pad, folks, the splash pad is a lot of fun. It's located over on Mason Street on the west side. And the splash pad is open from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. and from 5:30 from 11 to 7 each day for residents, and for non-residents from 5:30 to 7 p.m. So this is a splash pad where kids of all ages can go, and there's water squirting out of the ground and shooting everywhere and whatever. It's a lot of fun. And so that's open those hours. And then if you go to, you have, for instance, there are swimming pools at the Hunt Memorial Pool, the Rayco Theodore Pool, and the Livingston Pool. So those, in addition to the splash pad, those are open. And then, of course, there's swimming at Crystal Lake on the south side of the city. And these are all free services for city residents. The times for the swimming pools are each day, resident swimming is from 1 to 4:45 and from 6 to 7:30 p.m. there's during those same hours, there's a piece. Non-residents are allowed, if space allows, are allowed to use the pools from during those first period. They do the last 3 to 4:45 and from 7 to 7:30. But presuming if you're watching this show, you're a Manchester resident, so the pools, each of them is open from 1 to 4:30 p.m. each day and from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Now it's always struck me as strange, and I'm sure there's a good reason for it, which I presume is budgetary, because the hours that they have on here means that staff coming to work, and it's mostly high schoolers and college students that work these things. From 1 to 7:30 is means that if they started actually at 12 to get ready, they're finished by 8. It's an 8-hour day, so I presume that the budget of having people there earlier would cost a lot. But I'll tell you, if you were around Manchester in the summertime, and I'm very pleased that the city has these facilities to offer. But again, the Livingston Pool was a multi-million-dollar development back about 10 or more years ago. And it's a beautiful pool, and it comes right down to a tapered edge on one side. So even the little toddler, the smallest of babies, can walk in. There's a very shallow end on one side. And again, it has those sprinklers and stuff, squirting and all that sort of stuff, as well as being a full pool. But having it closed until 1 o'clock 1 o'clock every day, you think of a beautiful, Tuesday morning, or better still, like on a weekend morning, on a Saturday morning in the middle of July, and it's 90 degrees or 85 degrees and humid. And when I see those beautiful pools sitting there that are city investments, and they're chained and closed. It's another result of budget constraints. It's not the first place I would go looking for extra money to do things, but it's just an illustration of where the city is already all across all functions of government in every department is seeking ways to reduce spending. And this has gone on for 10 years, with year after year, maybe longer, because that's just it wasn't just the tax cap period. With city budgets and city departments being told, can you hold the line, or can you cut your budget by 1%? And so we've been doing this so long that we're down to the bone, so to speak. But back on the positive side, these pools are wonderful that they're there and they're available. And I can't get into all the rest because we'll get off on tangents. But the number of other free facilities that are available, like out at the Massabesic, Lake Massabesic, and Doris Pond and Crystal Lake, and I'm looking at I just looked up Crystal Lake quickly because the hours there are different. So Crystal Lake will be staffed for the 2018 season, starting on Saturday, 5:26 or 5:27, and Monday 5:28. Or that was that weekend. Okay. So the summer sessions, it's 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. Proof of residency is required. Non-residents are not permitted until 4 p.m. So that's a good long stretch with no break in the middle from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. And what a wonderful facility that is. So without going into all the other items, there's Fun in the Sun, which will be signing up I think next week. So if you that's another free program. So if you have kids, there's Fun in the Sun that's at over at Precourt Park or Piscataquag Park over Precourt Street. And on the west side, there's Fun in the Sun at Livingston, and also, or maybe one of the other at McIntyre. But anyway, these are programs, fun kids for kids up till age, like I don't know what the age is, 13 or 14 or something, for kids to be at. I have to give a plug to a couple of other things since I'm in plug night here. Manchester North Soccer, and not just Manchester North, but all the soccer leagues, and for that matter, all the leagues more generally. But first of all, Manchester Soccer's program, the British are coming soccer camp, is held the last week of July and then the first week of August every year for kids from 4 to 16. And it's a lot of fun. Coaches for 25, 26 years now come over from England and run excellent soccer clinics right there by the fields at Livingston Park, and it's a fun time. It's been around a long time. You can go to MNSL, Manchester North Soccer League, so MNSL .org, and you'll find the all those programs that you can sign up for there. And then you have, this is a time before you get fully into summer and you still are putting away the school books and the backpacks and the pencil cases and whatever else that moms and dads are tidying up this week from school. I know when my kids were smaller, we would sort of forget about the fall leagues in soccer or lacrosse or whatever people were playing in football. And we'd always be scrambling the third week of August to sort of run around. Oh my God, we didn't sign up the kid, or baseball, etc. So now is a good time to do it and get signed up and have your kids active in the fall. So that's the whole. The big message, ladies and gentlemen, is let's get out and have some fun for the summer. New Hampshire's great. Manchester is special. There's so much. If you go on and look at the things that will be happening downtown, even the number of events that are on, and some of those are for us adults. There are a lot of great things going on. So there's no reason to be sitting at home bored. You live in city for a reason. Cities have a vibrancy to them. There are groups and societies and of all shapes and sizes. Like for instance, one that I just got a text as I was coming on here. Somebody asked me to mention the fact that, let me just see if I can find it right here. Someone asked me to mention the fact that the St. Anselm's Choir and the St. Joseph's Choir were going to be playing a concert at St. Joseph's Cathedral in 2 weeks' time. And if I could just see where, just in honor of the person who went to the trouble of sending me this. So it's actually Tuesday, July 17th at 7:30. And it's at St. Joseph's Cathedral, which is on the corner of Pine and Lowell Street. And it's the St. Anselm College Choir and the Cathedral of St. Joseph Choir, singing a new song to the Lord, a celebration of the divine and the human spirit, featuring the choral music of Thompson, Bird, Stanford, Beeble, Bainton, Gray, Finzi, Nestor, and Stopford. Free will offering at the door. So again, and the wonderful conductor of that concert will be our own Eric Bermani. So that's just one of the many great things that are to be had in the city. All right. I have to tell you that I've spoken previously on this program about the immigration issue in our city and in the country. But again, because this is a local show, I talk about it. I talk about how it affects people here in this city, and I had the privilege and humbling honor to be invited to speak at an interfaith gathering to discuss and to contemplate and gather around the topic of the immigrant experience, which was held at St. Augustine's Church 2 weeks ago on Wednesday night, and it was a wonderful event with. There were people there representing a cross section of communities in the New Hampshire, from across southern New Hampshire. There were people of every religious faith and of no religious faith who came together to share stories. And Father Sam, who organized this, or at least emceed it, it was a past, immigration, present, and immigration future. And I challenge anybody, given the topics that people have been talking about because of the Trump administration's policy towards immigrant families, I challenge anybody to sit with or even listen to the wonderful people who immigrants who were represented at that meeting 2 weeks ago. I challenge anybody to listen to them and what they have to say and hear the wonderful things that they've done and they're doing with their lives, and not be moved in the first place. But I also am very confident that those who support harsh measures towards asylum seekers in particular, and refugees. I have to believe, my faith in humanity tells me that even the most hard-hearted would change their mind. I listen to the rhetoric coming out through tweets and other things from the White House over recent few days, and I have to tell you that the choice of language being used to describe the immigration problem or the immigration issue and the families of immigrants, the choice of language is appalling. It's deliberate, I think. It is nasty. It is dehumanizing. It is so to refer to, people pouring in over our borders is a word that's being used. President Trump yesterday described our border as being infested by people. He today went back to his comments and renewed them, the ones about the people who are coming here are rapists and murderers and not the best people, that they're not sending their best. So I am like most other reasonable people, appalled by what I'm reading and seeing, and by the idea that we're separating children from families. What I am most surprised about in this conversation is that there are still semi-reasonable people, because they're not really reasonable people. There's a hardcore of people who are justifying it and twisting in the wind, trying to find ways to defend this abominable and horrible policy. And make no mistake about it, the lies are everywhere. The administration's in a mess trying to get its story right, with half the administration saying that it's a policy in order to deter people. What an awful thing that would be. We'll take your babies away and maybe that will stop other people from coming. And there are some of the administration who are saying that that's a policy and some who are saying that it's not. President Trump is saying both, as usual, out of both sides of his mouth. And then to play politics with it is horrendous. And I can't believe that if you're a reasonable, not hard-hearted, totally biased person, that you could face down the entire body politic of the United States. So politicians of all stripes have condemned this. Most of the many of the leaders of the Republican Party have said this policy has got to stop. We've got to change this. We're not going to hold the poorest people, the people who are most vulnerable, we're not going to hold them hostage to try and get a political win in Congress. And so when you find yourself, the 35% of people who support this, and that's a dwindling number, but it comes down to sort of the hardest core of the people who supported President Trump in the first place. You can still, hate all the people you hate and love President Trump and disagree with him on this topic, because it is so inhumane. And I just find it amazing that people I know are still pushing back and arguing that black is not really black, white's not really white, that the truth is not really the truth. They're listening to one or two ridiculous, bigoted, angry, racist websites and media sources who are, of course, delighted to have this mess on our hands to begin with. But I'm just appalled that if you were sitting there, if I found myself having a political viewpoint. And I've no problem, arguing with other people. Not that I want argument, discussing with other people, and I don't expect everybody to agree with me. But if I were standing in one corner and I look around me, and the people who are telling me that I'm wrong in supporting the guy I'm supporting include most of the people in my own political party, most people with my political viewpoint, all the people who oppose my political viewpoint. But when you have something as conservative as the Council of Catholic Bishops of the United States, this is a group that, as a Catholic, much to my chagrin and disappointment, opposed Obamacare, has supported this idea of, freedom is under attack and religious liberty nonsense. I consider it nonsense with all due respects to everybody. But when groups like that are saying the policy must stop, that it's abominable, that it's immoral, the National Council of Catholic Bishops, a very conservative group, has had a proposal put to it that people who are supporting this policy and people who are carrying it out, that they should re-examine whether these people should be allowed to receive communion at Sunday Mass and things like that. So the evangelicals in the United States are speaking out against it. The whole world is appalled by it. And on news screens across the world, from Australia to Singapore, from China to Canada, from the tip of South Africa to Cairo, and from Norway down to Spain, everybody in the world, every night for the last number of nights, has been watching and listening and seeing the faces of children, the sound of crying children, and we have a Department of Homeland Security, a Department of Justice who refuses to respond. They showed a facility the night before last where teenage boys are being held. They've refused to even name the place where teenage girls are being held, let alone let anybody see those places, and they will not respond to questions about where the toddlers and little children are. So nobody knows where those people are being held. Families have been broken up, 2,000 children just since April. We know who we face, ladies and gentlemen. Let's not con ourselves. The President of the United States got elected saying that he was going to introduce a Muslim ban. He was going to build a wall in Mexico that the Mexicans were going to pay for, none of which was ever going to happen, of course. It's not because he's being blocked from doing it or anything else, but there was never any truth. He was lying to you when he said the Mexicans would pay for it, and he was the great negotiator and he was going to make it happen. Because he hasn't negotiated. The Mexican government has told him to get lost, basically. It was always illogical to imagine that the Mexican government would pay for a multi-billion-dollar wall across our southern border. And yet, that was the claim made by our president. And so it should be of no surprise whatsoever that somebody who has treated immigrants and refugees in the way that he has spoken about them since long before he became president, it should be of no surprise to you that that same person could impose a policy that would be as inhumane and unthinking and immoral as the one that our great country now has. And I've seen numerous articles and discussions in recent days about the past history of the United States and how there was when we thought that we had that these days were behind us. We could claim at some point that that a country that had allowed the internment of Japanese families during World War II. Not Japanese families, let's be clear. They were not Japanese families. I misspoke. I'm talking about American families, multi-generational American families who happened to look Japanese, were of Japanese descent, and had Japanese last names. And we, in a terrible a stain that has stayed on the consciousness of America for the last 70 years, we took these people's properties, we took them out of their homes and their shops and their stores and their businesses and their livelihoods, and we took them and put them in concentration camps. It's hard to listen to, and some people would think it's unpatriotic, but there's nothing unpatriotic about it. When I lived in England many years ago, I remember telling people who were talking about some matters that the first concentration camps in the world were built by the British government in South Africa during the Boer War. And it is what it is. The ethnic cleansing that started there was done by the British government. Now, 100 years later, the average proud Englishman or British person doesn't like to be reminded of that, nor should they have to be reminded of it if it's a past mistake and we recognise it and move on. Just like Germans don't need to be reminded every day about the horrors of what they did to Jews and other minorities during the Second World War. Neither is it nice for America to have to revisit what it did to Native American Indians or Native Americans. The promises that were made, the lies that were told, the promises that were broken, the treaties that were ignored. Not to go off on that tangent too much, but I have to just say this. Those people who say it's like, they broke the law, therefore they're criminals, therefore they need to be dealt with, is all a nonsense, because, when you look at the same thing is about treaties, and because of treaties, we have agreements and therefore we must honour our legal obligations and our treaties. Well, the obligations we had to Native Americans in numerous places across the United States were sworn documents that were legally binding, that were written between these Native American nations honorably, with supposedly honorable people representing the United States government and the Congress and President of the United States, and we signed these agreements, and then they weren't worth the paper they were written on, because in the end, might and power overcome righteousness. So we have a long history of making mistakes, and people make mistakes, and our big belief, of course, is that as a nation, as a people, as a human race, we march forward, that we advance, we become better, we learn from our errors. And so to live in America in 2018 and see it being becoming almost in the world view, in the view of the rest of the world, people are shocked. If you go visit the rest of the world, there's great love for America in the world, contrary to whatever the haters would like you to believe. Most people in the world look upon America with great benevolence, and they see America for what it is. The beacon of liberty and freedom and advancement and education and open-mindedness and tolerance, and collegiality, and the melting pot that races and nations and peoples and religions from all over the world have been able to gather in peace and in harmony and create a new vision and a new reality every day. That mixing pot didn't start in any one month or year or any one decade, and didn't stop at any one time, but is an amorphous, living, dynamic thing that goes on and changes every day, with every marriage of an Irish guy to a Greek person, or a Native American to a person of Hispanic descent, and all the others, whatever the mixtures may be. This is the glory of America, and this is what most people see. And it's only the haters who really are the fear-filled little people. Believe me, the people who support these terrible policies are in the end frightened. They're like the bully. They're frightened little men and women. And that's they're driven by fear, and fear leads them to intolerance, and intolerance to bigotry, and even perhaps eventually to hatred, which is a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. And so it is very troubling to me to read the headlines of newspapers across the world, to listen to a bunch of frankly not very smart people who are pretty ignorant, and not very well educated in the United States who don't believe what they read in USA Today, CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, CBS, ABC, NBC. Just go on. The list goes on and on. You know, it doesn't matter. The New Yorker, the San Francisco Chronicle, the every major newspaper in the United States, every major magazine, every all the sources of rational thinking are ignored in the face of some big fat white guy news.com, or we'll get rid of all the brown people.com, and I'm making those names up, but basically it annoys me and disturbs me and almost angers me, and I try never to get to anger, but it disturbs me greatly when people will quote some article on Facebook to defend the indefensible, and when you actually go in and look at where they found the article, and you think to yourself, that person's my neighbor, I know that person, I like that person, and this is the stuff they read. This is so, it's like finding out that your neighbor is addicted to porn or something, and is some molester or some horrible person. It just frightens me to know that there are people that I thought of as being rational, normal people who can even be, how they're able to read beyond the first two articles on some of these websites when they come across the Jewish hating New World Order, Christian first, we're all under attack, they're coming to get us, Muslims hate us, and there's a world caliphate coming, and all this bloody nonsense. It's just awful to read, and I feel terrible for the the minority and immigrant and refugee community in the Greater Manchester area. And when I read this week that there was ICE was on the Granite Street Bridge last Saturday on 293, that ICE agents were in the city bounds of Manchester. I see them here the first Tuesday of every month when they're doing things at the Norris Cotton Building. But to think that I talked a few weeks ago about roadblocks being set up on the Kangamangas Highway and on I-93 in New Hampshire, and then to read this week that ICE was active on Granite Street, just off of Granite Street Bridge in Manchester. Down in New York at the bus station in New York, stopping people as they're getting on buses. People like you and me and everyone just stopping people. Are you a citizen? Are you a citizen? Which they have no right to ask. When did that become okay? Any of you who've ever visited and gone to Canada or visited Mexico or gone to the Caribbean, and I know 80% of Americans have never gone beyond there for some reason. Well, I know the reasons, but if you've traveled around the world, can you imagine just, driving your car on some tourist area in the Great Ocean Highway in Australia, and all of a sudden being stopped, and it's some Australian border police in the middle of the country stopping you and saying, do you have papers? What are you doing here? Move on, next. It's an awful image, and the image, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly. I've been in communist Europe before the fall of communism. I was in Poland. I was in East Germany. I was in the Czechoslovakia. I went to Hungary. I was in those places when they were occupied by communists. And when I was on a train going through Eastern Europe, and guards got on the train and they walked down the train and said, papers, please, papers, please, papers, please. I knew I was in a communist country where the freedom of the people was not just at risk, but they no longer were free. And it's as a warning from Jim O'Connell, whatever that might mean. I'm telling people watching this program that if you don't stand up today and call out the bigotry and the hatred and the nonsense that a tiny group of people based in the White House and right around them, what they're doing in our country and to our country, ought to be stopped. I'd appeal to you to do the right thing and speak out against it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and have a great week.